Hey everyone, thanks for watching. We are doing our AskRev video. I've had this out for a month or so with questions regarding the server and questions that you've submitted as players, and I am aiming to answer all of them. There are a few that I was unable to answer. We'll get into that more as the video progresses, but hopefully this will shed some light on some long-standing questions, and we will be able to answer those for you, and maybe that'll prompt new questions, and we'll do these videos every so often. And so I appreciate the patience. I know that this has been a long time coming. But we are here now, so let's dive into it. Okay, so we had a question regarding Blaze and will it affect salves that you can put on your weapons? There are salves in the game, salve of frost, salve of fire, salve of acid, that change your weapon damage from crushing or piercing or slashing, any of the damage types, to cold, acid, or fire with those salves applied to your weapon. They work as an imbue to the weapon, similar to how you can imbue tools. The answer for this is no, and the reason why is how Wurm has coded the combat engine. So what Blaze does is Blaze specifically increases the amount of damage to, let's say, Flaming Aura. Um, there's Glacial for Frostbrand, and I think Toxin for Venom. But here I've gotten the Blaze code ready, so we have the enchantment numbers too. This is just some constant data that's available for the client or the server to read, and then this is actually where the code is that says what does that do, So it tells us if any jewelry enchant exists with Blaze and the other types of jewelry enchants that enhance these types of damages, then this is what's going to happen. So it's going to say we're going to get the current bonus for our Flaming Aura, and then we're going to add based on the quality level as well as the jewelry enchantment. So our Blaze enchant level and the quality level of the necklace or the ring that we have it cast on. And then that is applied in the combat engine because it's attached to this get spell damage bonus. And so that's all there is to it. It does not anywhere touch, salves or anything related to it. One would think that it does. The description is kind of misleading. It says will increase any fire damage that you cause. It should say will increase flaming aura damage that you cause, but this is where Wurm overgeneralizes. In fact, we can go ahead and we can take a look at where imbues come into place. So we have Salve of Fire, we have Salve of Frost, we have Potion of Acid. For the purposes of this video, I did the Salve of Fire. So we have Salve of Fire is item 91, and the only reference to this is in our combat handler. And so it just basically says instead of dealing a regular wound, we're going to deal a fire wound now. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. It is in the enchant table, so it looks like maybe down the line, maybe that's something they're going to do, but it's not something that they've done. It's not something I really want to try to mod in because when we start messing with combat engine and combat handler, that's where Dust Combat comes into play. Like Dust Combat has already rewritten that, so We might keep the eye on that for a future update from Syndusk. If Syndusk continues to work on Dusk Combat, that might be something to pick up. But I don't see it happening because, quite frankly, these potions and imbues were just never used in Wurm Online. For the longest time, they didn't actually work. In fact, most of the reference in the code is just turning your combat damage a different color. So that's basically that question. Does it? No. Will it? No. Will it ever? Maybe, but that will be a future patch by Worm Online, not by us. So we had a question that was, what is the policy on account sharing? In this specific situation, the spouse plays on Genesis as well. Would it fall under multiple accounts if the player logged in under the wife's account and used her account to link to the player's priest? No, we don't really care about that. I mean, essentially, uh, we really, the main concern is the deed, right? So if we have a Steam ID and we have an IP and we look at that and we see multiple deeds, one, if you're on the same Steam ID, that's not gonna ever allow you to create a second deed. But in terms of alts, in terms of sharing accounts, that's not so much of a concern. Uh, what the concern is uh, if husband makes deed one and then wife makes deed two right next to deed one, thus like sort of creating a super deed. And then gives each other like permissions so that way it's kind of like an alliance structure, and you've just got a super like a mass deed. But in terms of sharing accounts that way, in terms of linking, I don't think that's a big issue. If it becomes an issue, we would definitely address that in the rules in a future update. But for now, it's fine, and I don't see that changing. We had a question regarding industry and efficiency and what those do. Before I want to touch on that, I really would rather explain difficulty because without a good understanding of difficulty and the Gaussian rule that exists within Worm, then industry and efficiency won't really make any sense. But essentially in Worm, we have RNG, and RNG is based on a Gaussian rule. It's a particular type of curve effect, particular type of RNG. And so this simulation is for the resulting quality level of uh, basically mining. So with 100 mining skill, 100 pickaxe skill, and a 50 quality pickaxe, this is the projection of the resulting quality ore you would receive. You can change these values and you can see the difference. So if we have a 100 quality pickaxe, our curve changes quite a bit and we average a lot more at that exact 100 quality level, which demonstrates how important tool quality level is, which we already know. Um, but if we go to, for example, power for skill gain, which is a little bit different, we can actually see that we can go into the negatives. We have negative 40 to 0. This is important because there are some skill checks within Wurm Unlimited. This became a lot more relevant as of patch 1.9. And if you're not getting above a 0, you're not getting skill. There was a point where we had the closer that you were to 0, you were getting bonus skill gain, but we've since removed that because people that were failing and landing right around in here, failing intentionally, could just skyrocket through fine carpentry and things like that. In Worm Online, you actually have to be within, a certain range to even get skill gain. So if you're not within this range, which is what this calculator is designed to do, is to optimize this to get to about 50%, then you get no skill gain at all. So you have to kind of swap between a skill gain pick and a pick that's meant for getting the quality of material that you want, but that's not the case for Wurm Unlimited. So what does industry and what does efficiency do? Well, it lowers the difficulty. So I want to take a look at with our 100 quality stats, and I want us to take a look at Addy. So even though we have 100 quality pickaxe and we have the 100 skill levels, we're still averaging at about 50.54 as the resulting quality level. That doesn't take into account rare pickaxes, supreme axes, fantastic pickaxes. Doesn't take into account imbue power. There is the other calculator for that, but this is a good demonstration to show just how difficult addy ore can be to mine. The amount of 100 quality addy that you're going to get if the vein was 100 quality is very small. So industry and efficiency can be applied to tools to lower the difficulty. And so by lowering the difficulty even just marginally, so if we got it down to 55, for example, we can see that the curve moves up a little bit. Not by a whole lot. We're sitting at about 55. Higher casts, we're moving up to 63. And so you can see how this becomes more and more relevant. The code for that is in here in the rule Gaussian part. So essentially what it's saying is looking for the difficulty, and these difficulty are constants that are set, elsewhere in the code. But for that example, we saw that addy was 60. So when we mine and we mine without industry or efficiency, we're seeing that the skill is calculated and the difficulty is this. With industry and efficiency involved, we're lowering that difficulty and we're replacing essentially part of the code with a new difficulty. That new difficulty is calculated under this here. So it looks for efficiency and it looks for industry as well. Titan Forged also multiplies with the efficiency, so you can have a Titan Forged efficient weapon, but essentially just lowers the difficulty. So hopefully that makes sense. The higher the efficiency enchant, the higher the industry enchant, the lower the difficulty is going to be. You'll get better casts, you'll get better quality ore, and if you're having issues with skill gain, especially if you're using a high-end pick, you may consider putting, efficiency or industry on that if you're really still wanting to get that high quality material while still getting skill gain, because that exists. It exists especially in farming, which was another question that we had. Farming works on a similar principle. The farming changes went into effect at 1.9, and so we can see here, for example, with garlic, whether or not you're going to gain skill gain is highly dependent on the rate quality level. So if I'm sitting at 50 farming skill with a 50 quality rake and I'm farming garlic, I'm not getting any skill probably. Very unlikely that I'm getting skill. So that's why when you're first starting out, it's good to pretty much do corn and below on this list. But this is a tool that is in the tool belt on the Wurm Online forums. I recommend you check it out. Remember that this is just a simulator. It's not perfect, but it's what I use to kind of do theory crafting with numbers and things regarding difficulty and skill advancement checks. One question that we had is, does Rift Jewelery work? And for a long time, I've said, yes, some of it does, some of it doesn't. It depends, and unfortunately, that's still the answer. But we know now that more Rift Jewelery works, thanks to this question and actually looking at the source code here. Previously, it was thought that only the socketed Serral uh, rings worked, but this has actually confirmed that pretty much all of the Rift Jewelery in-game works except for the Artisan and the Fight Skill Gain uh, uh, jewelry. So there's an Artisan ring, and there's an Artisan necklace, and then there's a Soul Stealer necklace. Those three, I did not find any reference to show that those worked. So where we're seeing this, for example, Ring Rift 1 is 1076. So if we look at 1076, we can see that that's the stamina ring. And so just the fact that these exist is not good enough. That just means that they exist and that there's a spell effect for it. We need to actually see that the spell effect for that is doing something. So in the item bonus, we do. We can see right here that get stamina reduction. It says it's never used, but that's just part of the decompile, the way decompiling works. But yeah, essentially you are getting a bonus from the ring that lowers the amount of stamina that you're using. And just right off the bat, you can see all of these. Now, you'll see that get skill gain bonus is there, but the problem with the Artisan Jewelery on our server is that the Rift Jewelery is not actually part of Wurm Unlimited. Rifts are not part of Wurm Unlimited. It's a Wurm only feature. There's no public mod for Rifts. There are a couple servers that have kind of shoddily modded rifts, and some servers claim that they have identical to Wurm Online rifts. I can't speak to any of that. We may take a stab at implementing a Rift-esque sort of mod in the future, but how the Artisan Ring works, if you examine it, it says you'll get increased skill gain of X, where X is fine carpentry, it's mining, it's any skill, any of the skills. And when you get an Artisan Ring in Wurm Unlimited, it just says you have an Artisan Ring and you'll get increased skill gain. Since there's no actual skill ID attached to it, it doesn't work. So the Artisan Necklace, the Artisan Ring, and the Soul Stealer, which is for just general fighting skill, I've seen no evidence that that actually would work in here. If you get those, go ahead and try it out. Prove me wrong. I'd be very interested to see your stats with that. That being said, crafted shoulder pads will not do anything because crafted shoulder pads are not Rift shoulder pads. They're two different template IDs. So even though they're the same quote unquote item, if you look at the item name, they're two different IDs, and so they will not have the effect. They're just cosmetic. So, with that being said, Rift Jewelery does work. So this question came in about actually decompilation and how do we do what we do basically, and I wanted to touch base on that because I think anybody that wants to get into modding or even just look at the code should be able to. Um, Unfortunately, one of the policies by Code Club is that nobody is allowed to distribute the source code of Wurm Online or Wurm Unlimited. They give you the compiled server jar, client jar, and common jar. You're allowed to decompile it. You're allowed to mod it. You're allowed to do all of these things, but then to decompile the source and then just upload it to GitHub for other people to, download and take a look at, that's where you're breaching the policy. So maybe that answers the first question of where would you find the source code? You won't. You can't. But what you can do is you can download a decompiler. What I would recommend is I'm not really sure on the pronunciation of these tools, but Procyon or Procyon, I'm not really sure, is one of the better decompilers, I believe, because when you decompile um, Java code, it doesn't just automatically go straight to the right classes that it's supposed to go to. Um, in a perfect world, it would, but that's not always the case. So Procyon does it the best. And then if you're on Windows, especially, you'll probably want a GUI for that. So I've linked to um, the GitHub here for Luiton, which is a GUI for Procyon, and it essentially you put in the jar file that you want to decompile, and it decompiles it the best that it can. You can also use IntelliJ, which is what I write all my mods in. Of course, if you're going to do any of this, you're going to need to install some other things like Maven. Gradle is very important for modding, in my opinion. I prefer doing all my mods with Gradle rather than, messing around with Maven too much. But I know other authors really prefer Maven over Gradle, so it is. But Gradle was how I learned, so that's what I've stuck with. IntelliJ is a pretty good IDE. You know, you have support for Maven, Gradle, Kotlin, Groovy, all sorts of different Java-based builds, and they're all itemized out pretty well. It has GitHub support, so you can just, pull from GitHub, and then you can push right on back to GitHub, all within the GUI, rather than having to actually, open up a command line and get push out. So uh, hopefully that helps. Visual Studio is a no. Visual Studio does not have anything to do with Java. Some people might prefer Eclipse, I guess, for Java, but I don't. I think IntelliJ is a free solution that works good enough for our needs in the Wurm Unlimited world. I don't know anybody that's paying for software to do Wurm Unlimited modding. But if you're familiar with Eclipse, then maybe that's something that you've already bought. Then and that's what you're familiar with. Then definitely use that. Um, One thing I will say is that even when you do decompile it and through Procyon, and you pull it through and you load it up in IntelliJ, some of the classes are still going to be wrong. And you're going to have all these red lines because essentially these are all supposed to be part of a jar file, right? So all of these have been separated out, and so they can't make the correct references that they need to make. It doesn't really cause any issues, but it makes referencing some things and trying to see what is actually being said, you know, does it make sense? A little bit difficult, but that's actually really helpful for when you're writing a mod, because, for example, like in Spellcraft here, um, if I just start typing nonsense, I know that I'm not going to be able to compile this And not only does it highlight it here, it highlights it here, it highlights it here, it highlights it here. So I have to fix this. And there's a drop down, with saying, what do you mean? What did you want to do? And so that's helpful. There's a lot of utilities that have been written by the community. Bidu has his own utilities that are stuff that's built kind of on Java Assist, and so does Sendusk. He has Sendusk library, and I think Bidu is Bidu's mod tools that go a little bit further and are their own library sets of tools on top of just regular Java and Java Assist that help you with actually modding. But I think probably the best way to get into it is to take a simple mod. Maybe start with simple concrete. I think is a good one. Look at the source code, see what it's doing, and then duplicate it. Throw it on your local test server, and then start changing things. Change things. See if you can get simple sand to work. Right. So I made simple sand where you take a grindstone and sandstone shards, and you put those together, and now you make sand. That was based off of the simple concrete mod. Okay, so then once you do that, you get a better understanding of the framework for how the mod loader works. You can start to write more complex mods. It doesn't happen overnight, and there's a whole Wurm Unlimited server for just modding, where anybody that does mods pretty much is part of, and they will generally answer questions to the best of their ability in free time. So those are my tips as far as how to get into modding, how to get the source. Um, just don't upload to GitHub because you will be breaking terms of service, and that's never good. This question is, how does skill gain work? There's variation in skill gain, sometimes 0.0003 and sometimes 0.00021. In the same circumstances? Is there accurate ways to predict the size of ticks you'll get at certain levels, provided you know what bonuses you have? Um, as far as knowing what the skill ticks will be, no, not really. There's not a simulator for that. Uh, but the variation exists because of worm runs in milliseconds and the synchronization with your action on your client syncing up with the server is not instantaneous. There's also stamina reduction in play that affects it, but essentially, how skill gain works is basically this line of code right here. It says basically if your skill is not 100, then there's difficulty, and you take your current skill level and your bonus from like Path of Knowledge is Learn Mod, and then other bonuses, so like affinity timers, and all that's divided by the skill divider, and all that formula is put together. I would illustrate the formula, but it would be quite insane to do, to be honest. There's a lot of algebra and a lot of math involved, but hopefully that answers kind of the basic why is it always different, right? Because I know from my own experience, once you get up into the 80s and the 90s, you can queue 4 or 5 actions and you'll see smaller ticks and smaller ticks and smaller ticks. That's normal stamina drain, but then the last tick is somehow larger, and that's confusing. Uh, Sometimes it's not always the last tick, but basically what it is it's just the milliseconds not lining up correctly with server syncs. So hopefully that answers that question. working as intended, I would say. But the concept of being able to accurately predict the size of ticks, run through it once with 1 to 90 or 1 to 100, and you'll know the size of the ticks. That's the best advice. Or ask Willow. She got to 100 mining, and she can tell you what the size of the ticks are. Eventually, the ticks get so small that they don't even register, even if you have it set to always display skill ticks, because they are so minute that it takes several actions for even that one, however many decimal spaces out to even apply. So it does get quite grindy towards the end as you approach 100. But that's the game we play. So hopefully that cleared that up. If that doesn't clear it up, let me know. I guess one on one, and maybe I can answer a little bit further and show you kind of the math behind it. So the question is, are all skills on the same multiplier curve? I've noticed some skills go up quickly while others don't when they're at the same level. Yes, they're all on the same curve multiplier, but there is a certain amount of skill ticks, I guess you would call it, or an overall skill difficulty level for each skill. And we've modified some of these for the server, so gathering skills particularly are lowered on our server. Wood cutting, digging, and mining are all lowered in comparison to, let's say, carpentry and blacksmithing. I think we lowered them to 3,000 compared to blacksmithing and carpentry are 4,000. So you'll reach 100 and the gathering skills faster. And we did this because we wanted people to spend less time going out and having to get those materials, and spending more time actually enjoying the content, enjoying what they wanted to do with the materials. Because I think there's probably nothing more frustrating than having 80 blacksmithing and being behind in mining and having to go mine for 10 hours to catch up to your blacksmithing level so you can have better quality ore than your blacksmithing, which doesn't really hold necessarily true for carpentry, but if we were going to do it to one skill, then we wanted to do it to all skills. And digging actually was already set to 3,000, so we figured just make it universal. There are some other skills like that. I believe, we made defensive fighting a little bit easier because defensive fighting is extremely slow based on the concept that you actually only earn defensive fighting when you're doing damage, and your damage slowed down by defensive fighting, being at the defensive fighting stance. Shields also, because they have nerfed a lot of the ways that you used to be able to gain shield skill. So there are skills that you gain faster, and those are usually the really tedious skills. Taunting is another one. Taunting has been reduced probably the most because taunting is one of those skills that is extremely important, but the only way to level taunting is to pair up with a friend and taunt the same animal back and forth. And you can't gain another skill tick until your friend has, or the other player has taunted the animal off of you. So that's basically it. You have to have two people minimum, and they have to taunt back and forth. So we said let's make that much shorter than the 4,000 difficulty that it was originally sitting at, because that's just insane. Nobody wants to do that, but at the same point in time, we have Titan fights where taunting becomes incredibly important in order to maintain aggro and keep everybody alive. So those are the main things that I can think of off the top of my head. There may be more, but an astute observation, and I don't think we'll be making any other adjustments to those skill modifiers. Those were set up when Wyvern mods was introduced to the server, and I think they're in a good place now. I don't think we'll be changing them anytime soon. This question is: are the creation percent chances in Wurm uh, actually accurate? Sometimes they get chains of successes or failures that are incredibly low probability, along the lines of 1 in a couple million. Yes, they're accurate because of the Gaussian rule. And that's what I have up here again. And if you watched the portion on difficulty, this is probably already clicked and made sense. But essentially, when we do any action, the crafting window gives you a prediction based on the quality level of two materials, along with your skill, and if there's any sub skill that's necessary to calculate, it'll calculate that as well, and it'll give you the estimate. So if you're saying 99% chance, there's a 1% chance that you're gonna fail. That 1% can happen several times. Essentially, if we're looking at this, every item in the game is assigned a difficulty, and this holds true for everything. So even if we were to jack this up to 100, right? And we're using all 100 quality, let's say we were using all 100 quality tools, right? So nothing, I don't think there's anything really besides mass storage units for fine carp that have a really super high difficulty. Um, but we can see here that, yeah, we do get below 0 and we still do hit some failures, even at 100 skill. So the easier the item is, so the sooner it unlocks, the less chance we're going to have to actually fail. And then eventually there is some chance to never fail, right? So like our smell nails, our large nails, those initial building blocks of what exists to create most all items. But once we get into the more complex items, do those things ever really have a 100% chance? Unless it says 100% chance, no. And because of the way the Gaussian rule works, RNG is just a fickle mistress, and you can, sit there and repeatedly roll down below 0, and as if it's anything below 0, then it's going to be a non-create or non-attach an item to the total creation of it. So like colossuses, um, carts, ships, that sort of thing. But at the same point in time, that can also work to our benefit because we can also see the opposite effect when we have low skill. We don't see it as much, but here we see that even on Addy, we would get a 67 out of the 25,000 attempts. There would be 167 quality. This is not super realistic because this is, based on mining, and there are certain caps. Uh, but as long as the quality of the ore was 67 quality, we could theoretically hit that one time and get that 67 ore, even though our skill was below. So that's why when we have like a 1% chance to create, sometimes we're really lucky we get on the first try. And that's great. All the subsequent chances after that, maybe we spend another 5 hours just wasting time clicking a button. Grind the skill. That's that's my best recommendation. But are they accurate? Yeah, they're calculated correctly by the crafting window. I've looked at the code. Uh, all of it is set correctly. When I built the mass storage unit item, well, it was built, with Wyvern mods, but we tweaked it because we didn't want it to be something that was so easily attainable that, you know, bulk storage bin containers had no purpose. So we increased the difficulty of it, and sure enough, by doing so, we saw that it had a 0% chance until you hit that skill, and it's just the difficulty. So Hopefully that answers your question. It's a good question, but yeah, it's all just RNG. So this question is regarding Lib as a priest and why Mycelium is disabled. Mycelium itself is not disabled. We can paint Mycelium on the ground as GMs, but there's no way for players to create Mycelium. This is part of the 1.9 patch. While Lib has always been able to exist on Genesis, it was not always able to exist on Freedom on Wurm Online, and so this is a new change that came over from Wurm Online and kind of impacted the Wurm Unlimited game. But I believe pretty much none of these spells worked before, though I don't know because I can't say that I ever really tried to use them. But essentially, fungus, or well, now it's called corrupt, zombie infestation, land of the dead, rite of death, which is her right spell. They are not allowed on PVE servers. So in the code it says, "Is this a PvP server? If yes, then they're castable." Since our server is not a PvP server, then it says no, you can't do it just automatically. Could it be modified to say go ahead and cast it anyway? Yeah, absolutely. What are the ramifications of that? Mycelium spread. I'm not really concerned with the mycelium spread. In previous iterations of Worm, I would be concerned with the mycelium spread, but from what I've seen, it's really almost the opposite. That mycelium is being destroyed by grass. I think that they compensated for this, overcompensated for it almost on PvE servers because, for example, in the treasure map event area, we almost exclusively have fought on mycelium ground there because it looks cool. But we have to go in and paint it every single time because between the last treasure map event and the next treasure map event, all the mycelium has been destroyed and turned into grass. And there's not been any GM that's gone in there and done that. So um, we tried last time putting gravel around the entire border to prevent the grass from growing through. I realized gravel is not a true pavement type, so we may try, putting cobble all the way around the sort of arena with the treasure map area, and then painting mycelium, seeing if that works. If that works, then that might be an alternative. Um, and then we could look into modding it if it's something that the community wants. But um, really have only had one instance where it's been asked for. So just need to find out if this is something we need. If we need it, let's get it in server suggestions, and we can look into getting that as a mod that's put on the server. As far as the Syndusk mod is concerned, there's not a Syndusk mod that allows this to just happen. The Syndusk mod, in fact, I'll pull it up. It's under server tweaks, and then it's also reiterated in Wyvern mods. There's a lot of duplicates here, but it just allows if you have mycelium, live followers that are on PvE servers can absorb the mycelium because that was something that was also, is this a PvP server? And if you're not a PvP server, then you didn't have the option to absorb the mycelium. For those that don't know what that is, if you're a Blacklight follower, if you're a Lib follower or priest, you could actually right click a mycelium tile and absorb the mycelium from the ground, which will heal you for a small portion of health. So that's something that we do have enabled, but it doesn't really have any relevance because there is no mycelium on the server. So again, if we want it, just let's get a thread going in server suggestions, and I can look into modding it. I don't want to spend time on it if it's not something that we want, to pursue. This question is a very quick question. What is the config on sacrifice mod? Uh, this is the config on Sacrifice mod. It's 100, 1 in 100 chance. You have a 1% chance when you sacrifice a rare, supreme, fantastic item. You have a 1% chance to get a rare bone. That is not cumulative. If you put 100 items in there, that does not guarantee that you'll get a rare bone. You'll roll 1% 100 times if you put 100 items in there. So the chances are that you will get rare bones. I've simulated this and you usually end up with about 10. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But yeah, that's what it is. 1%. Good question. Okay, so our last question for this video and this session of AskRev is, how do Chaos Crystals and Enchanter Crystals decide what they're going to do? Are there any bonuses based on the rarity of the crystals? So yes, there is bonus based on the rarity. So rare, supreme, and fantastic all give bonus into the equation for what happens when you use one of those crystals. The higher the rarity, obviously, the better the bonus. But the skill that it's using is your parent soul skill. So I just want to reiterate that's soul. That's not soul depth. That's not soul strength. But you're just straight up soul skill. So that can be kind of grindy to get. You'll need a lot of soul depth and you'll need a lot of soul strength. But you can get there. We do get there with body, and we do get there with mind through mind logic. But that's where it all lies, and where we see that is right here. So our skill list, soul. And then as far as the rarity, our rarity is here. And it says grab the rarity, name it I, and then while I is greater than or equal to 0, do this. And then there's a counter, essentially. And so it's going to take the maximum attempt. So if it's rare, it's going to be 1. So that's why you can't use just a regular chaos crystal. You need a rare chaos crystal, or you need a rare enchanter's crystal. It's just going to do 1 roll. If you do a supreme, it's going to do 2 rolls, and whichever one roll is higher, it's going to apply the highest roll. If you use a fantastic one, it's going to do what is 3 rolls then, and it's going to apply the highest. So hopefully that explains that. Is a really good question. The chaos crystals are going to have another function. I've been kind of hinting at this, but I want to go ahead and kind of touch base on it. So there's another item within Wyvern mods that we haven't released, and I think that we'll be probably releasing it towards the end of the month of August here, called the Soul Reservoir. It's an item that you actually use chaos crystals to create. And what it does is it's combined with a new skill that's going to be introduced, which is called Soulstealing. If you kill an animal, you'll have, or any creature, you'll have the ability to steal its soul, and the soul will appear as an item in your inventory. Now, if you steal the soul, you won't be able to butcher it, so it's a trade-off. You're either going to butcher the animal, or you're going to steal its soul. When you steal the soul, you'll have souls, and you put that in a soul reservoir. And the soul reservoir, as long as it has souls in it, is going to keep all of your uh, forges, ovens, smelters, anything with a flame source lit. That's also going to keep all of your aggressive animals fed. So this is going to help with wyverns and maintaining their hunger levels, and hopefully not having them kill each other so much and killing other creatures as much. Uh, so this is just kind of a teaser towards that. I'm kind of hoping to have that released by the end of the month, um, but I want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with other things. that I've got going on in terms of mod development. But we'll probably be removing one of the skills that exists because that's essentially how you introduce a new skill into Wurm is you have to remove one of the existing skills. So I think we'll probably remove either preaching or thievery, and Soulstealing will replace that. And so if you have an affinity in either of those, then maybe this will be an improvement for you. I don't know that there's any benefit to having an affinity in Soulstealing. I haven't looked that far into the code, but yeah. So that's what the Chaos Crystals additionally can be used for if you're not one that wants to really gamble and take the chance, but you find yourself getting tons of crystal caches and you're like, what am I doing with all these Chaos Crystals? If you don't want to sell them to other players, you'll be able to start building these soul reservoirs, and I think they take 60 chaos crystals, I think is the default template. We may increase that or decrease that depending on what the numbers are. I'm still kind of looking over the database to see how many chaos crystals are in the game since we started releasing the crystal caches. Uh, but that wraps it up for AskRev. I want to thank you guys if you're still here at the end of this very long video. Hopefully, we can do this in shorter increments so these videos aren't as long. I let these kind of build up longer than intended, but that's the way it goes, chasing down bugs. Uh, but we do appreciate everybody's playing on Genesis server. We love you guys. If you're not part of Genesis, come on, check us out at genesisworm.com. Join our Discord. Links all down below. And until next time, take care.